Flying has always been one of mankind's greatest dreams. German pioneers of flight from Otto Lilienthal to Willy Messerschmitt turned that dream into reality. Now 2 million people travel by plane every day. High-tech microprocessors monitor everything from flight course to speed. Nothing is left to chance. This form of travel has more to do with the lifestyle of a sardine than the dream of unlimited freedom with which flying is so often compared. What is left of the original dream? Today we prefer a shorter flying time because we find it unpleasant. It doesn't have to be that way, and indeed there was a time when things were different. But back then there were Zeppelins. With the huge airships, it was possible to make intercontinental trips within a few days. Since small planes at the time were still leaping from island to island, it was a fantastic achievement. All over the world, Zeppelins were a sensation. Wherever the huge airships appeared in the sky, people looked up and cheered them on. They certainly weren't hard to spot. The biggest airship ever built, the Hindenburg, was 3 times as long as one of today's jumbo jets. In the 20s and 30s, the Zeppelin embodied a longing for faraway places. Around 1900, several men in many different countries came up with the same idea: to fly with a lighter-than-air craft. But only Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin achieved the great breakthrough. He equipped his models with a continuous series of technical refinements, developing them with a view towards the future. Zeppelin himself isn't around anymore. A pity, since we, with the help of our politicians, may have robbed ourselves of our most glorious form of travel. But we'll come back to that later. What we sometimes see in the sky today are nothing more than advertising balloons in Zeppelin form, called blimps. No comparison at all with the original Zeppelins. These smaller airships would have no trouble at all fitting inside the part of a Zeppelin reserved for the tail and side rudders. Takeoff, however, is similar to the way it was in the old days. The ground crew has to haul the airship into the wind. But back then it took not 10 men, but 100 to tow the largest transport vehicle in the world. It was as long as the Eiffel Tower is high and comparable in size to the Titanic, or the most famous cruise ship in the world, the Queen Elizabeth II. The Count from Lake Constance must have been slightly eccentric, to say the least. It's hard to believe that by the time he began building Zeppelins, the native of the city of Constance, born in 1838, had already completed a successful career as a general in the cavalry regiment. In the war of 1870-71 against the French, he led a platoon of men behind enemy lines. Zeppelin's patrol division earned themselves a place in the history books. He had always had a keen sense of historical destiny. It was Germany's Wilhelminian period, and the era, despite all the criticism leveled against it, still inspires a certain nostalgia. One thinks upon the time with a mild and forgiving, one might even say wistful sigh and a smile. It was a happy, perhaps even overconfident golden era, which the Zeppelin was perfectly suited to. The shining silver airships cast their glow even into the back courtyards of the inner cities. "Oh dear Uncle Zeppelin, humbly we beg of you, come to our region astride your steed of the air. To the hum of her motor and the sound of spinning propellers, please make a few passes over our humble home." What we primarily remember when we speak of the Wilhelminian period is that most Germans under the rule of Kaiser Wilhelm II felt exceptionally comfortable and happy for a whole quarter of a century, more contented than in any other time before or since. It was the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, and the air was filled with a passionate optimism about the future. German efficiency, German faith, and German innovation were intended to become a powerful force in the world. "Full speed ahead" was Kaiser Wilhelm's motto. It was widely discussed which type of flying machine had the most promising future, those lighter than air or the heavier ones. And if lighter, then would it be built with a rigid framework or keep the usual balloon construction? Again and again there were setbacks. Pioneers risked their lives. But finally the Zeppelin took to the air, and its curve of success took on a steady vertical rise as well. But the Count didn't let up until he was sure the sturdy aluminium framework, which housed the gas-filled bags, fully met his exacting demands regarding weight capacity and speed. As many as 16 of these gigantic gas bags filled with hydrogen were attached to the interior of the frame. Between the bags, which were made out of cotton, ran a catwalk along the entire length of the ship. This enabled specialized mechanics to quickly locate possible gas leaks. The largest part of the entire volume of the Zeppelin was reserved for the gas bags, leaving only 5% for passengers and crew. Nevertheless, it contained the most luxurious cabins imaginable. The interior of the ship was a shimmering labyrinth of transverse aluminium girders and steel tension wires. All the girders laid end to end would have reached a total length of 16 kilometers. The specifications of the girders changed throughout the years. It became necessary to accommodate the growing size of the ships by using sturdier raw materials. The tubular metal rings, this one with a diameter of 40 meters, which gave the Zeppelin its distinctive form, were assembled horizontally at ground level. To keep them from bending out of shape as they were being attached to the frame, they were hooked onto an assembly ring and moved into place within the body of the ship. There they were attached to the lateral girders and braced tight with piano wire. This unique technological design was already specified in the Count's earliest patent descriptions. A total of 130 kilometers of stretched and crisscross piano wire would later absorb the tension caused by the lifting force in the upper half of the ship and by the downward pull of the passenger section and the engine gondolas in the lower half. Here, the nose tip is assembled. The outer hull gives the surface of the ship the necessary aerodynamic sleekness. It was made of cloth, specifically cotton or linen, depending on its position and how much stress it had to endure. The cloth was painted with several coats of Zellon paint to make it weather resistant. Aluminium powder was mixed into the paint to give the hull an insulating reflective surface. This was high-tech from the German town of Friedrichshafen. Finally, the top of the interior was given a coat of red paint as protection against ultraviolet rays. The time of the Kaiser's reign was the great era of the Zeppelins. The Count had a vision. If the Zeppelins prove able to contribute to the fatherland even the slightest additional power to hold off its surrounding enemies, he said, then my life's work will not have been in vain. He worked and fought for his vision. He was the untiring motor behind the building of the airships. And speaking of motors, 5 12-cylinder diesel engines at circa 530 horsepower each, housed in the exterior gondolas, gave the Zeppelins a top cruising speed of over 130 kilometers an hour. But Count Zeppelin was having problems. Even officials in Berlin were showing a preference for other types of airship construction. Although this new form of air travel was heavily promoted when the first Zeppelin airship embarked on her maiden flight on July the 2nd, 1900, the venture turned out to be a financial catastrophe. The breakthrough hadn't happened after all. It seemed the Count's entire fortune, which he had invested in the project, would be lost. The end was in sight. Paradoxically, an accident finally brought success. On August the 5th, 1908, the LZ-4 was forced to make an emergency landing near Echterdingen on the outskirts of Stuttgart. But suddenly a strong gust of wind tore the airship free of its anchor and out of the hands of the ground crew. The airship caught fire and burned in a matter of minutes. No one was hurt. But then something peculiar happened. At the site of the calamity, a donation campaign was started, which eventually grew to national proportions. Over 6 million marks were collected. With that, the continued development of Zeppelin air travel was secured. The Count became a living legend. His small foundation quickly grew into an industrial empire. He hired workers and proved to be a fine judge of character. Throughout his life a modest man, the Count, with his pioneering spirit, was the center around which the entire venture revolved. Next, the floating hangar in Mansell was torn down. It had only been designed to accommodate the first small prototypes. By now, the Zeppelin was celebrating one success after another. On August the 18th, 1909, in Berlin, offices and schools were closed and a festive spirit filled the entire city. The streets were overflowing with people. Millions had come out to greet the arrival of the magic ship. It was the first time a Zeppelin would land in the capital city. At 10:40 a.m. the great Zeppelin was still just a dot on the horizon, but calls of "It's coming," could already be heard. Soon, after a slight turn, the contours of the silver giant could be clearly seen. The city had been waiting for days for this event. The tightly packed crowds of people waited anxiously. The big moment had arrived. The airship throttled back. Each flight maneuver could be clearly followed. Countless hands waved to the arriving passengers. Before anchoring, the airship made a ceremonial tour of the city's most prominent landmarks. The sightseeing cruise lasted almost 2 hours, finally ending with a pass over the Victory Column and the Reichstag. Everyone was overwhelmed by the joyous mood of the moment, an excitement impossible to put into words. Slowly, the airship neared Tempelhof Field. The Kaiser and his wife, the Prince and Princess, as well as several other members of the royal family, are already there to greet her. The airship comes in straight, floating smoothly towards the landing field, every second bringing it nearer to the ground. Soon, it's possible to make out the face of Count Zeppelin himself. Accompanied by shouts of command from the crew and a slight bump, the airship completes its landing. The old Count comes to the window. There's no holding back at this point. The Kaiser rushes to the gondola and gives the Count a hearty welcome. What followed would remain a lasting memory for everyone there. Berlin celebrated and the rest of the world looked on. The empire resounded in triumph like never before in the 20th century. Technologically, the Zeppelin was without doubt far ahead of its time. The only drawback was its use of highly flammable hydrogen gas. The engineers were aware of this, of course, but for reasons of cost, rejected the use of the less hazardous helium. And apart from that, the valuable gas would have had to be imported. The entirely domestic nature of production was one of its main sources of pride. This pride was quite justified. The state-of-the-art navigation and communication technology, as well as the innovative advances in propulsion and lightweight construction, were not only applied, they were also developed by the engineers themselves. A gyroscopic compass, drift gauge, meters regulating the amount of tension from anchoring to the mast, mechanized telegraph equipment, a pneumatic dispatch system, and even a telephone system were all built-in features. The air screws ran especially smooth, thanks to extensive testing. The Zeppelin industry was the showpiece of the German Empire, a technical sensation that drew the attention of the entire world. In 1909, following the lukewarm response to the Zeppelins from the military authorities, Count Zeppelin finally, and unhappily, conceded his permission for a civilian use of the airships. The Delag, the German airship travel company, was founded, setting off a boom in production. In Friedrichshafen, one airship after another floated out of the assembly hangars from LZ-1 up to LZ-130. The Zeppelin Deutschland embarked regularly from Düsseldorf. Soon after, LZ-6 was stationed in the city of Halle. After that came the Schwaben, the Victoria Luisa, the Hansa, the Sachsen and the Bodensee, named after Lake Constance. The list goes on, all the way to the most famous and largest airship in the world, the Hindenburg. By this time, Zeppelins were flying to regular destinations according to precise timetables. Whenever a new airship was ready to leave the hangar, it was carefully inspected by a well-informed public. The Zeppelin became a matter of national sentiment. Songs, poems and words of praise flowed in from all over Germany. Every new airship was seen as a triumph. Some would have given all they had to take off into the world just once in the glorious Zeppelin. Now, the sword must decide. In the midst of peace, our enemy attacks us. To arms! We will prevail in this battle, even against a world of enemies. At the Kaiser's call, Germany's soldiers were eagerly going off to war. The imperial military believed they were far superior to their enemies. Although they had doubted for years whether airships were at all suited to wartime activity, they were now, on the Kaiser's orders, being built in mass production. Entire fleets of Zeppelin bombers were intended to reduce the enemy's cities to rubble and ash. Special airship docks were built by the Army and Navy. England and France as well had high hopes for the new wonder weapon and built up their own armed Zeppelin fleet. The airship's most important task was to fly both reconnaissance and bombing missions behind enemy lines. The sorties usually lasted from 15 to 20 hours each and were flown on almost a daily basis. The war brought accelerated technological development. For the first time, spacious and self-contained gondolas were built. They were essential for navigation during long trips. With their capacity to cover a wider radius, the airships were superior to the seaplanes of the time, and this was where they really could prove themselves. They conducted surveillance of the access routes to the Baltic Sea and guarded the naval fleet from surprise attacks. But almost every attack carried out by a Zeppelin spelled doom for the airship's crew. The following is an eyewitness report of an enemy mission to England. Our course is headed for the English coastline. What will the next few hours bring? Such suspense. Finally, our long-awaited wish to conduct an offensive against England is being fulfilled. Our hearts beat faster. In the distance, we can see the English coastline. We can clearly see the fires burning. Before us lies England, as on an atlas. We decide not to try to penetrate too deep inland, but rather choose the city of York as our target, which we finally reach that evening. The effect of our bombs is dazzling. Those were the first aerial bombing raids in the history of the world. At first, the Germans with their Zeppelins were successful at striking fear into the heart of England. But the actual military significance of these attacks was negligible. For the English fighter planes, the military airships were an easy adversary. Missions often had to be aborted early due to technical defects. They were extremely vulnerable to weather conditions and were dependent on clouds or fog to conceal themselves from enemy warplanes. These peaceful airships eventually proved entirely unsuited to warfare. They were too big, too slow, and too cumbersome. They were unable to keep up with the fighter planes' much faster rate of technological development. Nevertheless, Zeppelins were still used for reconnaissance right up until the end of the Great War. Hundreds of crewmen lost their lives. Just how these missions were conducted can be seen in this unique original footage. On March the 8th, 1917, while the country was still in the midst of war, Count Zeppelin died. His death came as a shock to the people at the time. He was buried in the Park Cemetery near Stuttgart. A procession of kings, dukes and generals accompanied his casket. Perhaps they already felt that the war was lost. In fond memory of the Count, a Zeppelin floated in the skies above his grave. He was buried with full military honors. Count Zeppelin's greatest wish was to make his airships into the fastest and safest form of travel on the planet. He left behind a considerable fortune. In his will, he stipulated that all profits from his various businesses were to go towards the continued development of international airship travel. My airships will soon be among the most significant forms of transportation, offering safe travel with comparatively minimal risk to life and limb for the occupants. The old Count, it seems, was right. The luxury liners of the air unleashed a sensation wherever they appeared. Even poets and writers such as Hermann Hesse gave in to the euphoria. When I close my eyes, I can feel the floating lightness, the soft travel through the air, he wrote. Once again, I'm enthralled by the view of the wide-open landscape and have the feeling of being far from all small-minded earthly concerns. He wrote these words in 1911, following a short flight over Lake Constance. But Zeppelins aspired to greater things. They set a course for every continent on the earth. Passengers and crew brought back stories of adventure and anecdotes from Greenland to deepest Africa. A machinist recalls a particularly lively episode. I was in the rear gondola as third machinist. The aft gondola hit the ground and scraped along for a bit. The front engines were still running full speed ahead. Head engineer Zeit jumped out of the gondola. I can still see him as if it were yesterday. He spun around 3 times and then landed in a pool of water. 80 meters further on, I got out as well and went around to the back of the ship, and when I got there, I saw that it was resting on top of a native's hut. In the hut, there was an open fire burning. I ran right in there, grabbed a pot, emptied it out, grabbed a copper pail, got some dirt and some water in it, and threw it on the fire to put it out so nothing worse could happen. This native, he received 500 milras for damages. In our money, a milra was 12 pfennigs. It wasn't much. But the native went to church every day, lit candles at the altar and prayed that another airship would land on his hut so he'd get money again. The high point was the round-the-world trip of 1929, when the airship dubbed Graf Zeppelin circled the globe in just 12 days. The driving force behind this was Hugo Eckener, who became so popular as a result of the trip that he was even seriously considered a candidate for Imperial Chancellor in 1933, nominated to succeed Hindenburg. After Count Zeppelin himself, Hugo Eckener is the most famous airship captain and charismatic head of the Zeppelin Company. Even the astonishing development of the airplane has been, in spite of general public opinion, unable to threaten the Zeppelin ship's ability to survive. The airship flies non-stop from Friedrichshafen to Tokyo in just 4 days. We can travel from Berlin over the Arctic regions in 5 days and return home with living and scenic views of unreachable zones of the Earth, which, till now, had only been approachable one step at a time against the daunting forces of nature. We've linked Europe with the continents in the southern hemisphere through comfortable and safe flights, holding our timetables to the minute. As such, we are pioneers of international relations and reconciliation on the side of invincible technology against resistant and unfriendly forces that would hinder the dawn of a new age for humanity. Eckener was originally a journalist for the newspaper the Frankfurter Zeitung and had written a few critical articles about the start of the first Zeppelin. In response, the Count, who was fully aware of the power of the media, paid him a visit. Count Zeppelin offered Eckener a job. Within the company, he pursued a unique career. From press relations officer to airship captain to director of the foundation, and finally to chief executive of the entire company. Following World War I, he saw to it that the reparations airship, the LZ-126, christened the Los Angeles, was built and risked crossing the Atlantic with it. In the event of a total loss, both he personally and the company would be financially liable. But the delivery flight was a unique success, which gave the German people the feeling that, following their wartime defeat, they had again re-established international contact. Naturally, the course around the world was set by Eckener himself. For interminably long hours, the Zeppelin traversed the Siberian tundra. Huge rivers, vast swamps, forest upon forest, and finally, the endless calm of the Pacific Ocean. A machinist continuously had to look after the engines. During the journey of several thousand kilometers, the passengers were pampered with champagne, caviar and lobster. Hugo Eckener personally relayed the reports from the pilot's gondola. In Berlin, Tokyo, Los Angeles and New York, Eckener received a hero's welcome. In New York, one of its famous ticker tape parades was given in honor of the Zeppelin helmsman. The passengers area in the Hindenburg was even larger than the one in the Graf Zeppelin. The built-in hotel complex occupied 2 whole floors within the ship, complete with fully heated and electrically ventilated cabins. The 9-meter-long pilot's gondola was attached to the exterior and fitted on the bottom with a landing wheel. Inside was the direction finder's cabin, and in front of that, the map room and navigation cabin. At the tip was the helm, with separate stations for vertical and horizontal piloting. In each of the 3 rooms, auxiliary equipment to the main gyro compass was installed. Mounted at the lateral piloting station was a magnetic compass as well. The most modern monitoring equipment was to be found here, particularly in the machine room amidships, where the electrical transformers were installed. The rudders were controlled either with the help of a motor or by hand with the use of levers. There was even an automatic lateral rudder control which worked in conjunction with the compass. The wireless cabin within the ship's interior could be reached from the direction finder's cabin by way of a ladder and an airlock. The original wireless, state-of-the-art for its time, can be seen in the Zeppelin-Museum in Meersburg. Telegrams and phone calls were no problem. Antennas were extended and retracted by winding cranks mounted in the floor. Communication was high on the list of priorities. Every maneuver the Zeppelin made, and every time it passed over a noteworthy site, the public heard about it. Good public relations may have been one of the secrets of the Zeppelin's success. At the Zeppelin Museum, Heinz Urban explains the individual transmitters.
This
is a teletype machine from Nordyke Radio. With this, the Morse code was recorded when a telegram was written and then relayed via teletype. That looks like this, for example. This is a telegram from LZ-100, the Hindenburg, which had been sent from on board the airship. And here we see, for example, the all-frequency receiver, which was used not only in the Graf Zeppelin, but also the LZ-30, the Graf Zeppelin II, and the Hindenburg. There were several transmitters on board. For example, UKW, long wave, short wave, as well as an emergency transmitter. A particularly fine piece of machinery is this super heterodyne receiver. It was used for only a year in the LZ-30, the Graf Zeppelin II. It was at that time a very, very good wireless. It still works today. Back then it cost 150,000 marks. Here we have a very early model from 1935 made by the Philips company. This model was used for half a year, but it didn't transmit a good enough signal, so this one from Telefunken was used instead. Contact between the most luxurious ivory tower to the world down below was guaranteed for the passengers. Every room, from double-berth cabins to smoking salon, promenade and dining saloon, was comfortably done, but with the lightest possible furnishings. The dining room was located port side. The menu, as well as the service, was equal to that of a 3-star restaurant. Every table was decked in white linen, fresh bouquets of flowers, and the glittering porcelain service with the logo of the Zeppelin Company. Much of the food, such as lobster or poultry, was brought on board alive and prepared fresh in the onboard kitchens. The cooks changed their cuisine according to the country they happened to be flying over. Meals lasting several courses made the day pass like a dream, along with a well-stocked cellar of the best wines and champagnes. Notice the prices. panoramic picture windows afforded passengers an unrestricted view of the world below. The Zeppelin was a flying five-star hotel with the world's most spectacular view, for the privileged, of course. A ticket over the Atlantic cost as much as the equivalent of half an entire year's wages of one of the machinists aboard the Hindenburg. To Rio, the price was 1,500 marks. But full comfort travel with hydrogen on board would soon reveal itself to be a fatal technological dead end. The year 1937 still lay in the future. For now, the enjoyment could go on. All passengers' quarters in the airship were connected to each other via hallways and a stairwell. There was even a specially built aluminium grand piano weighing in at only 200 kilograms. The walls of the sitting rooms consisted of stretched silk cloth, painted with a map of the world showing the routes of famous airships and cruise liners. The chairs had a simple functional form. The famous Bauhaus style was the epitome of modern design at the time. Smokers met in the pressurized smoking room, which could be entered through an airlock. Everywhere else, a strict policy of no smoking was enforced. Upon entering the Zeppelin, all lighters and matches had to be surrendered. On board, the bar stayed open until the last guest had gone to bed. The cargo included live animals, whole automobiles, and mail sacks stuffed with valuable correspondence. The Zeppelin was perfect. The passengers were spared any of the usual fears of flying or discomfort. With the help of a ballast system containing over 40 tons of water, which could be gradually released, as well as gas valves, the airship could be precisely maneuvered in any direction. But during the Third Reich, the airship would enjoy only a precious few months of happiness. But before the end, many premieres would be celebrated. The first airborne mass was conducted. Due to the danger of spilling the communion wine, it had been previously forbidden, until it was proven that a fountain pen could stand vertically balanced during several hours of flight time. But destiny had already set the controls on a deadly course. On the 6th of May 1937, the Hindenburg was on its way to Lakehurst, New Jersey, in the US.
It's crashing terrible. Oh my, get out of the way, please. It's burning, bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring mast, and all the folks agree that this is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's like 20, 400 or 500 feet into the sky, and it's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. It's smoke and it's flames now, and the flame is crashing to the ground. All the humanity and all the passengers screaming around it. I told you, I can't talk to people. There's friends are on there. I can't talk, ladies and gentlemen.
After this day, there was hardly a single Zeppelin to be seen in the sky. In spite of extensive investigations, the cause of the accident was never determined. 22 passengers and 13 crew members lost their lives. Many more were critically injured. News of the catastrophe shook the world. The adventurous airship era now seems like a distant dream. Perhaps we in our time of faster, higher, further aren't yet ready to return to this form of travel. But at some point, it will return. Till then, auf Wiedersehen, Zeppelin.